1996, convicted child killer Ronald Jebson made another shocking confession. 26 years of waiting come to an end for the parents of the babes in the wood, now on CI, in a brand new murder casebook from Fred Dinage.
The Babes in the Woods case reveals a great deal about how predatory paedophiles operated in the 1970s.
After 30 years, we finally brought closure for the families, Gary Handler and Susan Blatchford.
I always wished that it had just been a murderer, because when they told me what he'd done to my son, I've never been able to cope with that.
It is imperative, of course, that serial killers are caught as soon as possible, and most are apprehended within months of committing their crimes, but some manage to evade capture for many years. In the case of the Babes in the Wood murders, it was a quarter of a century before the police discovered who the killer was. So how did this man avoid detection for so long? And why did Ronald Jebson admit to his guilt after 28 years? I'm Fred Dinage, and I'm investigating Britain's most infamous murderers. I want to know what turns them into killers, sentencing themselves to death or a lifetime behind bars. The deaths in March 1970 of 11-year-old Susan Blatchford and 12-year-old Gary Handler shocked the nation. They were found in a shallow grave in a wood at the edge of Epping Forest. Over the years, this tragedy has remained in the public consciousness and become known as the Babes in the Wood murders. The abduction and murder of a child is the most disturbing of all crimes, striking at the very heart of youthful innocence. One man who studied the extraordinary events that led to the capture of the Babes in the Wood killer is retired Detective Chief Inspector Declan Donnelly.
Gary, at the time, was 12 years old. Very, very small for his age, so very much on the slight side, but from what I know, very exuberant lad, very much into his football, and definitely a young lad who would like to be outside, nothing better than kicking the ball around and wandering around the fields and all the open spaces that existed then in that part of Enfield.
Gary Handler was a year older than Susan Blatchford. They both lived in the suburban area of Enfield in North London. They were school friends and had only known each other for a few months. Susan originally had her eye on Gary's brother Frank, who was a few years older, but had decided she preferred Gary.
At the time, in Enfield, Susan lived at Riley Road, which is only a short distance away from Maryland Avenue, where Gary lived. I think she enjoyed, probably with Gary kicking a ball around, very, very much, I think, described by her mother, Muriel, as a bit of a tomboy. But again, very, very vivacious, very, very outgoing.
On the 31st of March 1970, Gary Handler's mother, Beryl, returned home from work. She picked up her children from a neighbour who'd been watching them after school. Beryl and Gary's brother Frank remember the day well.
I got home at 4, went over, got Sharon and Gary. He went straight into the garden, got his football, and then there was a knock at the door, and it was Susan. And she said, can Gary come out to play? I said, well, he could play down the side here, the side to my house. I said, but he's not allowed to go out the gate. And I thought, you could always hear his football. I had his very special dinner that he liked was lamb chops and roast potatoes and everything. And I said to him, dinner won't be long, it's all in the oven. He said, oh, lovely. And I never heard his ball, and I looked out, and he was gone.
The young friends left the house and headed off, with Gary carrying his football.
So he went out with Susan into the street, Maron Avenue, and then, as far as we're aware, there were a few people, school friends of Susan, who saw her in Maron Avenue, and there are some sightings, again, from people who knew Susan, saying that they crossed the Silverstone Road and made their way up through a gateway near the Royal Oak Public House, made their way up towards Cox area.
The young friends Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford headed towards Sewardstone Green in Chingford. This would be the last time they'd ever be seen alive. In 1970, 24 children under the age of 14 had gone missing in London, but most had been found within the first 24 hours. The night of March the 31st turned bitterly cold, and on April the 1st it snowed. Neither Gary nor Susan had returned home.
I just thought he'd gone down to meet his dad and Frank off the bus. You know, I thought that's what it was. And then when he never came back with them, I knew there was something wrong. I went straight to the police station at Ponders End. That was my nearest police station, and Susan's dad came with me.
What did they say to you?
I think it was only about 7 o'clock in the evening. They said, we can't really go out, send anybody out, because he might have stayed at a friend's. Has he got any friends where he would have stayed? Is there anywhere where he'd have gone? And I said, no. He wouldn't be out in the dark because he's frightened of the dark, and that's why I think the police decided to go out searching earlier than what they would normally do.
Frank, what are your memories of that night?
I suppose when you're 15, you're just thinking, perhaps it's just being a bit of a scally and just, you know, as you would playing truant or anything else. And then obviously by the next morning, you worry and panic.
The police search for the missing children, helped by family and friends. No trace of Gary or Susan was found. On the day after, on the 1st of April, Scotland Yard were called in. Detective Chief Superintendent Leonard Reed, the man who put the craze behind bars, took control of the investigation. The hours turned into days, and the days became weeks.
He felt this is just not two missing persons, this is something a lot more serious. So he expended huge amounts of his own time and obviously the time of the officers under his command. There was the use of tracker dogs, looking at all the fields, surrounding fields, far out to Waltham Abbey, all around that particular area. So if you're familiar with the area, you know that it is quite vast, or was then, in terms of the open spaces, the green fields, the woods.
The hunt for Susan and Gary involved over 500 police officers. 15,000 people were interviewed and 4,000 homes searched.
It was a huge operation in terms of searching houses, searching outbuildings, following up leads from many members, thousands of leads from members of the public. The interesting part about this, and Leonard Reed told me this himself, I think it was the first time, according to Mr. Reed, that a helicopter had actually been used in the search for missing children.
The police questioned many suspects from the surrounding area, including convicted child sex offender Ronald Jebson. The police interviewed him twice, but Jebson had an alibi. Criminologist Professor David Wilson knows just how difficult it can be for the police to narrow down a list of suspects with very little evidence to go on.
Ronald Jebson was rounded up and interviewed because he was a convicted paedophile who was living in the local area of Enfield at the time. He had been released from prison in 1970, having been convicted of entering a 6-year-old girl's bedroom and sexually assaulting her. So he was released back into the community at the time that Susan and Gary go missing, And more importantly, he had just been arrested for sexually assaulting an 11-year-old boy in the Nottingham area. So it was quite natural that the police would want to interview anybody that had that kind of offending past, because they were going to be suspects that would have to be ruled out of the investigation.
And what you also have to bear in mind, this was one person out of possibly hundreds that were suspects at the time. There was no technology that you have now to put things into a computer, to what I would say, to join up the dots. What you were working on was without getting into it too much, a card system. So in other words, you would have cards with, there's a vehicle seen there, for example. There's a witness who's been interviewed there. There's something we must follow up, and this is on another card.
So he was interviewed and then released. Why was he that convincing?
Well, Jebson had an alibi. He was able to persuade the police conducting the interview that he'd been staying at the home of Robert Papper. So he basically was able to explain that he and Robert Papper had spent the weekend together, had gone to the labour exchange to enrol for work, and in effect, Jebson was able to persuade the police that he couldn't possibly be guilty of these murders, partly because of the fact that the Pappers were able to provide an alibi.
On the 17th of June 1970, a man walking his dog on the edge of Epping Forest made a gruesome discovery. A shallow grave containing 2 bodies, just a few miles from where the missing children lived. Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford had been found.
Josh Phillips killed my daughter when he was 14 years old. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her.
If all children are born innocent, what turns some into killers?
He's been a really nice kid. This is a parent's true nightmare.
I had never seen anything so ugly, so evil, and so horrific.
We really do come to believe there's pure evil in the world. Kids live with it. That's something.
Kill the Kids, Mondays at 9 on CI.
I got some news for you. Those wise guys at Fox has made this new range of biscuits called Cafe, specially to go with a cup of coffee. Which got me thinking, they're so good, people are gonna start drinking more Joe. So I called a friend of mine in Colombia, and bada bing, Vinny's going into the coffee business. Little friend, you're gonna make Vinny very happy. So try them all. You won't regret it. Well, you might regret it if you don't. Capiche?
Some things can get in the way of your time together, like erectile dysfunction. Or like having to go more frequently or urgently, symptoms of BPH. Ignoring it isn't the answer. Talk to your doctor. Help is available. You'll be glad you got it out of the way.
People say that there's nothing left to discover in this world, but there are lost worlds and lost Edens to be found. I was working on an isolated mountain in Malawi, and I noticed there were similar mountains over the border in Mozambique. There was nothing written about these mountains. To actually find a hidden rainforest like this shows that we don't have all the answers and we don't know what's out there.
The Chocolate Bomb. Amazing milk chocolate mousse with a rich, dark chocolate centre, topped with popping candy. And it's £4. Go on, it's Christmas.
I just wanted you to know.
Nothing captures how you felt like a photo, and sharing those photos is easy with personalised wall calendars from Vistaprint.
I just wanted you.
Pick a design you love, upload your favourite photos and make your own by adding captions and special dates. So visit vistaprint.co.uk/TV and save 50% when you create your calendar for just $7.99 plus free deliveries.
Inside every small business owner, there's a top dog. He's the reason you like to be the boss. The Great Dane amongst Chihuahuas. He puts the dog in dogmatic. That's why a business loan from Everline has him super pumped. It's a way of borrowing that puts you in control. You can apply for as much as £50,000 for up to a year and even pay it back early with no extra fees. That dog is inspirational. Everline.com. Credit at your command.
Alaska's beautiful and dangerous all at the same time. You can get away with whatever you want because there's nobody there. A lot of killings in Alaska. There's plenty of ways to get rid of people in this country. He was definitely the predator, they were the prey. What he liked to do was hunt.
A brand new series, Ice Cold Killers, starts Wednesday the 4th of December on CI.
I'm exploring the case of the Babes in the Wood murders and the man behind the horrific killings, Ronald Jebson. On the 31st of March 1970, 12-year-old Gary Hanlon and 11-year-old Susan Blatchford went out to play in Enfield, North London. They'd gone for an innocent kickabout, but had never returned home. 11 weeks later, 2 bodies were discovered in nearby Epping Forest.
The bodies were discovered in the hide by a gentleman out walking his dog, and his dog was attracted to the hide, and once that particular person, that gentleman, pulled away the foliage, he was able to see what he thought was human remains.
Now, clearly, if a body is out in the open for that length of time, there's going to be a lot of animals eat parts of the body, their internal organs had gone, albeit they were both still clothed, with the exception of Susan's bra, her knickers, her stockings had gone missing.
Susan and Gary had been found just a few miles from Gary's house. They were laying together in such a position that they appeared to be hugging each other. This, and being found in Epping Forest, earned them the name Babes in the Woods. How did you hear the news of what had happened to Gary?
We heard late that night. We didn't. They just said they found 2 bodies, and my brother-in-law come round and said he'd heard it on the news. And because we never went to bed for the whole 12 weeks, we just sat in the front room and I kept the fire going and the light on. And the reporters came round.
When you heard the news, what effect did it have on you personally?
You didn't come out of your room for about 3 weeks, did you?
I didn't eat for 2 weeks.
No.
People were trying to force me into eating and talking to me and all the rest of it. I don't know, it's just like party being ripped away. It's just, everything seems so final, I suppose. And that's where it's been ever since, to be honest with you.
The children's remains were exhumed and taken to the medical examiner. They underwent a series of tests, but the examiner was unable to ascertain the cause of death.
The body of Susan, when that was actually examined, it was found that her trousers had been split at the sides and pulled down. Her underwear had been removed and taken away, and then the trousers just folded back over her body. When further examination was taken at the mortuary, what was interesting, they were able to look at this and decide, well, how could this have occurred? And I'm aware that Leonard Reed never thought that either of these children on the 31st of March, when they went missing, had actually laid down in a copse and died.
The Babes in the Wood murders is thought to have been one of the only crimes Detective Chief Superintendent Leonard Reed didn't solve during his time at Scotland Yard. Throughout the 1960s, the level of awareness about child abduction had increased significantly. In 1965, the Moors murders hit the headlines. with Ian Brady and Myra Hindley kidnapping and killing 5 children. These were followed by the Cannock Chase murders between 1964 and 1967, where 3 young girls had been tragically killed. Cases such as these prompted campaigns highlighting the danger of strangers. Children were told never to get into a car with someone you don't know. This time is seen as a turning point in how we view safety in childhood. Professor David Wilson is going to explain exactly the reality of that danger today.
I've gone out into the streets to ask members of the public how many kids, on average, do they think are abducted and murdered by strangers in England and Wales on any given year. So let's listen to what people have said about that particular question.
1,000 to 2,000 roughly? In the UK alone? 10.
About 5?
There is so many, but there's probably a lot you don't hear. 700.
4,500. Maybe see a couple of hundred.
So Fred, a real range of views there. What do you think?
I would think a very low figure. I would agree with the gentleman who said 10, but I also agree with people who think there are probably many, many more children who disappear, who go missing, that we don't hear much about.
Well, on average, and this is a figure that's remained stable since the 1970s, 6 children a year are abducted and murdered by a stranger. So we're dealing with a very rare phenomenon. Here's our next question that we asked members of the public. How many children a week are murdered by their parents or carers?
In the 30s, something like that?
I would say 8. 2 or 3 a week maybe.
Maybe 50. Maybe a couple of dozen.
Well, it's actually 2 children a week will be murdered by their parents or carers. But the key thing here is that sense in which the public think children are going to be threatened by a stranger danger, whereas in fact the phenomenon of murder is that a child will be murdered by someone who is in a relationship with that child. The next question I wanted to ask members of the public is which age group do they think is most likely to be murdered in England and Wales?
Very young, I suppose, because they're so vulnerable.
0 to 3.
Teenagers who've been out drinking, so 16 to 18-year-olds.
Between 14 and 18, I reckon that's the age where children are starting to grow up and they're starting to venture out, through social networking, via the internet, they're able to get more freedom, and then that's when they're likely to encounter the wrong people.
Age group between 11 and 15.
Statistically, the age group that's most likely to be murdered are children below the age of 12 months.
No.
When we discuss our murder casebook, we're discussing quite unusual cases because the pattern of murder in England and Wales is it's likely to be a child, and that child is likely to have been killed by someone that they know.
But there's always the evil exception to the rule, someone like Jebson.
And Jebson is the classic example of the kind of predatory paedophile who will abduct and murder a child who is not known to him. He is effectively every parent's worst nightmare in that respect.
The inquest in September 1970 reached an open verdict. The police had no leads, and scientific evidence couldn't prove whether the children had died from exposure or foul play. Some of Susan's clothes were missing, but this was put down to possible wild animals. But the parents were not convinced.
Reed didn't believe that these children hadn't been murdered, and nor, more importantly, did the families of either Susan or Gary. In fact, Susan's mother said the only animal that could have removed Susan's bra and pants and stockings is a human animal, and that person needs to be caught or he will strike again.
Just as Muriel Blatchford predicted, another child would die at the hands of the killer. But it would take police another 28 years to discover who the killer was. But one man who'd been questioned and released by the police knew more than he'd revealed. Ronald Jebson. He'd been born Ronald Harper in 1938, but had his name changed when he was adopted by the Jebson family, who lived at Hatfield in Hertfordshire.
We know relatively little about him during his childhood, other than the fact that he was seen as a bit odd. He was often quite lonely. He would be able to try and get people to feel sorry for him. The other thing that we know about Jebson is that he was convicted of sexual offences within his teens. Now, this is classic predatory paedophile behaviour. From age 15, he's convicted of indecent exposure, then indecent assault, then sexual assault. So gradually, throughout his teens, throughout his 20s and 30s, we're going to see that the sexual offending that he engages in becomes more and more severe, which is typical of the pattern of predatory paedophiles.
Considered a loner, he joined the army and was discharged. He frequently moved from place to place, changing his name and identity to keep his past history secret.
There is suggestions that he was able to ingratiate himself with people, always seemed to be the one who'd been put upon, the one who was vulnerable, to get sympathy. So I think that was probably a part of him that would allow himself to work his way into the company of the people who he wanted to be with.
So sometimes he'll use the name Ronald Jebson, other times he'll use his birth name, which was Ronald Harper. On other occasions, he will use a pseudonym Alan Purchase. What, is he married? Is he Christian? Is he Jewish? He constantly plays with his identity as a way deliberately, I think, of covering his tracks because, of course, he's a predatory paedophile.
During this time, Ronald Jebson was in and out of prison. He was an alcoholic and amphetamine addict with prior criminal offences, who once told a prison psychiatrist that he was evil and that he was afraid of himself.
We know that he frequented the Enfield area. In fact, one of his convictions for sexual assault, he, in or around 1968, assaulted a 5 or 6 year old child. He went to prison for 2 years.
On the 2nd of March 1970, Ronald Jebson was released from Wandsworth Prison. He moved to Enfield, but was soon visiting an old friend, Robert Papper, in Hatfield, just a few weeks before Susan Blatchford and Gary Hanlon disappeared. A coincidence, or something more sinister?
He liked killing. I think he liked the excitement of it. I think he loved the power and the control.
What a madman I was. What are we going to have to do to stop him?
I don't think I've ever seen such a dedicated group on any case that I've been involved with.
All new crime stories.
That's a lot of satisfaction being near that guilty verdict.
The new series, weeknights at 7 on CI.
It's a cracker at Morrison's. Buy one, get two free on this Cadbury selection box. Hurry, get them while you can for Christmas.
Virgin Media, now with Netflix. The greatest moment on TV since... Find out more online.
Many fan heaters simply fail to project heat efficiently. The Dyson Hot and Cool fan heater uses air multiplier technology for fast, long-range heat projection to warm you in winter, and also high-velocity smooth airflow to cool you in summer. So all you need, whatever the weather, is the Dyson Hot and Cool fan heater.
Let's stop being embarrassed. Yes, you sweat. And no wonder. You've got thousands of sweat glands in your intimate area. And sweat can cause odour. So why sit back? Let's do something about it. New Vagisil Odour Shield Wash. created by our experts to help stop odour before it starts, so you can stay confident. Part of the intimate treatment and daily care range from Vagisil, your intimate health experts.
Looking for something tasty? Bird's Eye Rice Fusions. Delicious fluffy rice with vegetables, herbs and spices.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Please, we hardly know each other.
Bake more of midweek with Bird's Eye Rice Fusions. And now introducing new Veg Fusions.
A glorious medley of vegetables and garlic and herb butter.
New Bird's Eye Veg Fusions.
See the magic of Christmas with a Canon EOS 100D with £30 cashback.
If there's one thing I've learned, it's that life's easier when you have a little flexibility.
With a Wonga loan, you choose how much you'd like to borrow and when you want to pay it back.
We're totally flexible, so you can be too.
Short-term loans you customise yourself. That's pretty smart.
That's right-o, up to £1,000. Very nice.
For a short-term loan on your terms, visit Wonga.com. Wonga.com. Straight talking money.
Every Thursday, CI investigates the paranormal.
You could feel the presence of someone.
With brand new The Haunting of.
It's got like this, I don't know if it's a robe or a coat.
Oh my gosh, that's what I saw.
Followed by all new My Ghost Story.
I got this creepy feeling, and that's when I captured the hand on the bands.
Paranormal Thursdays.
You feel the cold? This room, this is where you didn't want anybody.
Every Thursday from 9 on CI.
I'm reinvestigating the brutal killing of Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford, the Babes in the Wood murders.
In 1970, both children have gone missing. They were discovered dead 11 weeks later. The medical examiner couldn't determine the cause of death, and it was recorded as accidental. After the children disappeared, the police interviewed a number of suspects. Ronald Jebson was on that list and had given an alibi for the night in question. He was a convicted paedophile who only weeks before had been released from prison. Jebson had gone to stay with his old friend, Robert Papper.
What's interesting about the Pappers is that clearly Robert Papper was an old school friend of Jebson's. And therefore, one would think today that the Pappers would know a great deal about Jebson's offending history. Now, we're used to today simply Googling, going onto the internet, discovering things about individuals and about their past. But in 1970, especially with someone who is a predatory paedophile like Jebson, he would be adept at hiding his offending past. This is a man who's constantly lying about his past.
Papper and Jebson were both unemployed, but had managed to buy a car. This allowed Jebson to expand his predatory territory. On the 4th of April, Jebson was arrested and charged for sexually assaulting an 11-year-old boy in Nottingham. He was sentenced to 5 years inside prison. Meanwhile, headlines were making the national newspapers of the missing children from Enfield in North London, Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford.
When somebody who was convicted of sexual offences in the 60s and 70s, when they went to prison, there were literally very few treatments that would have been available to have helped a convicted paedophile try to change his behaviour. You know, I was a prison governor by the early 1980s, and until the late 1980s, we still put convicted paedophiles, isolated them, put them in the same wing, isolated them from the general population, and did absolutely nothing to overcome their sexual offending history. And therefore, you know, they were almost walking time bombs. As soon as they were released from prison in the 60s and 70s, they were almost guaranteed to offend again, because literally nothing had happened to them in prison to change their offending behaviour.
Ronald Jebson served only 3 years of his 5-year sentence before being released. Once again, his old school friend Robert Papper invited him back to his home.
He made his way back to where the Pappers lived, and again asked them for lodgings, whether he could stay with them. He was given some form of lodgings, whether it's just the settee for the night or a bedroom. It's not entirely clear. What happened between the Pappers and Jebson was some sort of falling out. Over what, one can only speculate, and that I don't know. But they fell out, and there is evidence to suggest that Jebson threatened the family. He threatened Robert Papper. He threatened him that he would get his own back, and that what he would do, Papper would not like. Those words horrifically came true.
Jebson didn't wait long to take his revenge. On the 9th of June 1974, he went to the local primary school to pick up one of the Papper's daughters, 8-year-old Rosemary.
He went to the school where Rosemary Papper went to. I believe that was a special needs school. And he picked her up in his car, and he drove her around for a period of time.
Jebson takes Rosemary to a field, forces her to perform oral sex on him, and clearly he wanted to have full intercourse with this 8-year-old girl. She is crying, drawing attention to herself, and therefore Jebson says he can't sustain an erection, so turns Rosemary onto her back and strangles her.
Why would Rosemary Papper have gone with Jebson?
You've got to remember that Rosemary Papper, this 8-year-old girl, would have known Ronald Jebson. He had lived in her home. So when Uncle Ron turns up at the school gates in his car, she would have thought nothing of it. She would simply presume that she was accepting a lift who was a friend of her mother and father's and gone with Jebson in his car. Predatory paedophiles have got to gain access to children, and this was simply one of the ways that Jebson was able to gain access to Rosemary, because of course by that stage he wanted to punish Robert Papper for the fact that Robert had thrown Jebson out of their home.
Ronald Jebson had killed 8-year-old Rosemary Papper, exacting his revenge on her family. But not content with Rosemary's murder, Jebson visited her best friend, 8-year-old Michaela Odwell, whose father he'd also befriended.
I think I was about 6 months older than Rosemary. We lived just around the corner from each other. I met her when I was 4. And we still kept in touch for another 4 years. She went to a different school, I went to a different school to her, but we always used to see each other every weekend, and we used to play around. She was blonde, blue eyes, she was a stunner.
Over 40 years later, Michaela still remembers how Ronald Jebson's presence unsettled her whenever he was around.
He had piercing eyes, and I mean piercing eyes. It was like he was looking right through you. He had dark hair, very cropped hair. Quite, I wouldn't say tall, but not short. I often said to my dad, I don't like him. There is something about him I just don't like. And it's the way he spoke, the way his actions, the way he was looking at all of us as we grew up. Especially me. There was something not right with him.
Ronald Jebson arrived at the Odwells' house, claiming his car had broken down.
Dad said, you can keep on the sofa. He had blood in the middle of his jumper. My dad said, what happened, Ron? And he went, oh, I cut myself. So my mother put the jumper in for soap. Then Dad told me to go to bed because, of course, school day.
The next day, Michaela stayed home from school with a headache.
My mother was in the garden talking to a neighbour. And I thought, oh, okay. I'd play with my toys. I had porcelain doll and porcelain tea set. I was playing with it, and suddenly I heard the stairs go. He opened my bedroom door and he said to me, "Do you want to play a game?" I said, "What game?" Before I knew it, he had me pinned to my bed. He was hitting me and I'm screaming, hoping my mother would come in, because my bedroom window was wide open. I'm screaming for help. No help came.
Ronald Jebson was out of control. Michaela was his next target.
Then suddenly, just as I was about to rape me, the back door went. It was my mother. He put 10p in my hand and he said to me, "If you ever tell anyone what I've been doing up here, I would do exactly what I did to Rosemary. I strangled her, I punched her, I hit her, and I raped her, and I'd do the same to you," he swore. So anyway, he went downstairs, and then I heard the front door go. It was my dad coming in from work. I asked my mother how I was. "Oh, she's all right, as far as I know." Then suddenly I heard the front door go again. It was that thing leaving.
Michaela was too scared to tell anyone what Jebson had told her. However, with Rosemary Papper missing, Jebson became the immediate suspect. The police saw he was a child attacker with several previous convictions, from theft to rape.
35-year-old Ronald Jebson was arrested the next day and immediately confessed to the murder of Rosemary Papper. He was convicted and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years. He made no mention of the fact he'd been interviewed 4 years previously over the Babes in the Wood killings. After all, he had an alibi. Or did he?
Alaska is beautiful and dangerous all at the same time. You can get away with whatever you want because there's nobody there. A lot of killings in Alaska. There's plenty of ways to get rid of people in this country. He was definitely the predator, they were the prey. What he liked to do was hunt.
A brand new series, Ice Cold Killers, starts Wednesday the 4th of December on CI.
If you've never tried panettone before, you're in for a real treat. Our Morrison's bakers make these fresh from scratch in store, really soft and buttery. And this one is packed with milk chocolate chips. It's to die for, and only £2 each. Go on, it's Christmas.
Let's get comfortable. You've got an itch and it's killing you slowly. Did you know there are over 60 things that could be causing that itch in your intimate area? What are you going to do? Scratch it in the queue? No can do. Let's do something about it. Vagisil Medicated Cream, created by our experts to give you the fast relief you need. Part of the intimate treatment and daily care range from Vagisil, your intimate health experts.
Lucky, 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 lucky pants. Lucky, 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 lucky pants. Go get your lucky pants. Go get your lucky pants.
Register now and get £30 free and 10 free spins on our exclusive slots at luckypantsbingo.com. Smarty Pants can increase their chance at luckypantsbingo.com.
Send a parcel this Christmas from just £2.60.
I remember the first time I went for a meal with my best friend Lizzie. We were at this little Italian place on the high street. She ordered pasta and I had something called Follow Milanese. After we'd finished eating, Lizzie said, "It's on me." When I asked why, she said, "It's a little thank you for being a good friend of mine." Well, it felt brilliant, and that's exactly how I felt when I heard Lloyd's Bank were paying me back for some jeans I'd bought on my card. When I asked why, they said, "It's on us, as a little thank you." Apparently they offer thousands of people the chance to get this every month. On everything from a couple of skinny lattes to a couple of tickets to the opera. And that's on top of the cashback I can get when I buy some of me everyday stuff. They're just small acts of kindness anyone can appreciate. And you know what? I'm sure that's something Lizzie's gonna love.
Bad breath is a very common problem, although many people do not know they suffer from it. Bad breath occurs due to stale-smelling sulfur gases which originate in the mouth. CB12 is an effective solution for this problem. CB12 eliminates the sulfur gases which lead to bad breath and is effective for 12 hours. CB12, only available in pharmacies.
I know sometimes you easily lay it down the wrong path. I want you to go in the program because I want you to see what jail is like.
Now you look like an inmate. That means you belong to me now. You better get something done. And if you just found out that the person that takes care of you is going to leave you in jail. What are you crying for, man?
All new Beyond Scared Straight starts Monday the 9th of December, only on CI.
Tomorrow on CI, keep your friends close and your neighbours closer. Snapped, Women Who Kill at 8. Then the man whose father was murdered by his brother and mother tells his devastating story. Britain's darkest taboos, brand new and exclusive to CI at 9 o'clock, followed by the bathtub killer, Unusual Suspects, new at 10.
I'm re-examining the Babes in the Wood killings, the horrific murders of 11-year-old Susan Blatchford and 12-year-old Gary Hanlon, and the man behind them, Ronald Jebson.
In the spring of 1970, the two children disappeared and were found dead 11 weeks after they went missing. The verdict was recorded as accidental death. It wasn't until 26 years later, when the startling news found its way to Scotland Yard, that the truth was revealed. A convicted paedophile and child murderer, Ronald Jebson, serving time in Wakefield Prison, had confessed to a prison officer that he knew who killed the two children. In 1996, the case was reopened, and Detective Inspector Declan Donnelly led the investigation.
He gave a set of circumstances. He explained how he'd been with the Pappas on that particular day, how they had visited the Enfield area. He talked about the fact that all three of them were in the car. They saw two children walking along, that they were enticed into the car and then taken back to this address of the Pappas. And they were then held for a number of days, according to him, and during that particular period, they were sexually abused numerous times, according to Jebson, by the Pappas.
When asked what happened to the children, he replied, "I don't know."
Why would Jebson have done that after all those years?
Usually in maximum security prisons, there is a hierarchy which has sex offenders as the lowest of the low. They're reviled by most offenders. But most of the sex offenders are isolated from the main body of the prison population, and therefore, bizarrely as it might seem, there's a hierarchy amongst the sex offenders. And I slightly get the impression that he was trying to impress those other predatory paedophiles about the extent of his offending behaviour.
The police investigated the allegations made by Jebson against the Papa family. He'd originally used them as his alibi at the time when he was first interviewed by police. But when Robert Papa and his wife at the time were interviewed, they gave credible alibis for the 31st of March 1970, the day when Susan and Gary had disappeared. And they confirmed that Jebson wasn't with them, like he'd stated to police, when the children went missing. The original post-mortem was re-examined, and bleeding into Susan's ribs, dismissed at the time, was questioned again.
His view was that bleeding into the ribs, that was blunt trauma. He said that only could be caused by compression. And when asked to Well, what sort of compassion? Somebody kneeling on the chest of that young girl, Susan.
Jebson was interviewed again by the police with the knowledge that the Pappas had no part in the deaths. He still denied any involvement in the killing of Susan and Gary, but was arrested for the murder of the two children. On Monday, the 24th of August 1998, Ronald Jebson called Edmonton Police Station saying he wanted to change his statement and confess to the murders of Gary Hanlon and Susan Blatchford.
And in effect, he tells a story of spotting these children as they were going to play in a field. He entices them into his car. He gives them alcohol. There is some indication he may also have given them some cannabis. He takes them to an isolated spot where he is able to sexually assault Susan. As that sexual assault is taking place, Gary seemingly has tried to protect Susan, which meant that Jebson had to attack Gary.
One of the things that he actually told us was, when asked, well, can you expand on that? Can you explain in some more detail exactly how this assault took place? He then mentioned that he had actually knelt on her chest when he was strangling her. So in other words, that provided that piece of corroboration. He gave that up voluntarily. He provided that bit of corroboration which accorded with what we had from Dr. Heath.
During the 4-hour confession, he told Declan Donnelly the full story.
When you sit across the table and you're interviewing somebody like that, it's not until you look across it and you see how cold, calculating, how manipulative it can be. He talked about Little Ron. Little Ron was the insecure, the quiet person, the person who wouldn't literally say boo to a goose. Inoffensive, wouldn't harm a fly. But there's Big Ron. And sometimes Big Ron gets the better of Little Ron. And Big Ron commits the deeds. Vicious deeds, sadistic deeds, and Little Ron tries to prevent it, but he can't because he's overpowered.
Ronald Jebson had kept his evil secret to himself for 28 years. Susan Blatchford's body was exhumed for forensic testing to try and prove his version of events. And Jebson, amazingly, even tried to infer at one stage the children had brought it on themselves.
You know, I've worked a great deal with predatory paedophiles, and one of the most common things that a predatory paedophile will say to me is that actually the child came on to him as opposed to the other way around. That the child was interested in sex, not the predatory paedophile. These are called techniques of neutralization. These are ways in which the paedophile can explain away his sexual interest in a child by actually saying it wasn't him that was interested sexually, but the child that was interested.
On the 28th of March 2000, Jebson was charged with the murders of Susan Blatchford and Gary Hanlon at Brent Magistrates Court. He received 2 life sentences. The killer of the babes in the woods had finally been convicted 30 years after committing his unspeakable crimes.
And Frank, how did you react when you heard that news?
Obviously it's an initial shock, but then it's, I don't know, it's a mixture of emotions. Part of me, I was glad. Another part of me, obviously sad. But I'm glad it all came out.
And I always wished that it had just been a murderer, because when they told me what he'd done to my son, I've never been able to cope with that, because I keep visualising it, and I never saw my son. They wouldn't let me see my son, so he was buried without me seeing him, so I still don't think that he's gone.
one thing sticks in my mind. He turned around and he said, I started on Susan, I got hold of Susan. He said, I think he was only little. He said, and Gary went for me and he tried to fight me, he went, and I finished him in seconds, and that hurt me.
Jebson ruined your life, didn't he?
Completely, yeah. That's what he done. He ruined all our lives. You know, I still think he's going to come in. It's another thing I can't get over, because I wasn't allowed to see him. So I still, when Frank was showing me now, for a minute, I think, is it him? No, that sounds a bit mad. And that's how I feel. He's not coming back, is he?
I've forgiven him for what he's done to me. Because when he dies, he'll have a lot more than to me to contend with. But I'm better than him. I think, to be honest with you, I've learnt to respect people, to respect their differences, and not to judge anyone. But I judge myself. I can't help it. If I could take my whole insides out, give them a damn good wash and put them back, I'd be fine. But I can't do that.
The most horrific crimes are those that involve the murder of children, especially those who've fallen victim to paedophiles. Ronald Jebson destroyed the lives of 3 children and left behind other victims of his abuse. Today, the media brings these threats and anxieties closer than ever, and it seems that nobody's children are safe. With just 6 children killed each year, it seems a small number, and yet one is one too many.
A young woman bruised and battered on the backseat of her car, and an endless list of suspects for a homicide hunter. Brand new next. Tomorrow, premeditated murder rips a family apart. New and exclusive, Britain's darkest taboos at 9.
In the Navy, on this particular Sunday at Christmas, the chef came out with this biggest Christmas pudding, and he set fire to it. It's the first time I've ever seen it. Of course, afterwards, whenever I was home, we said we've got to set fire to our pudding, you know. And that was one of the things. It was lovely.
There's never a good day to lose your debit card, but there's definitely a bad one. And that's the day you need to pay for the birthday cake, the bouncy castle, and the present. But should the worst ever happen, just head to any of our selected Barclays branches and we'll replace your debit card the same day. Oh, you don't bank with Barclays? Oh dear. Awkward. To avoid that sinking feeling, make Barclays your bank.
Things really are crystal clear with Wonga.
How much your Wonga loan costs is entirely up to you.
You're in complete control.
Using the sliders on our homepage, you can choose how much you want to borrow and for how long, and we show you how much it costs straight away.
Couldn't be any clearer than that, really.
Think you've taken the sliders a little too far, Earl.
Oh.
For a short-term loan on your terms, visit Wonga.com. Wonga.com. Straight talking money.
Just do Christmas. Do it in style at ferry.co.uk.
Who says foundation has to be thick? That was then, this is now. Unveiling new Nude Magique Eau de Tan by L'Oreal. Shake it and discover on your fingertips a foundation lighter than water. Glide it on for amazing coverage as light as a feather. Looks perfectly invisible, invisibly perfect. New Nude Magique Eau de Tan, only by L'Oreal Paris.